After our wedding, my husband said his family was taking our honeymoon trip to Bali without me. The past few days of my life have played out like a soap opera. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be treated like an afterthought by my own husband, no less. And we had only been married for a few days. But let me give you some context so you can understand how I ended up in this mess. Growing up as the eldest daughter in a traditional household, I was conditioned to put others' needs before my own. My parents were strict but loving, and their expectations for me were sky high. First to go to college, first to land a well-paying job, and now, first to get married. Their pride weighed heavily on me, making me desperate to ensure my marriage was a success. Enter James, 29M, charming, kind, seemingly perfect. We met at a mutual friend's get-together, and from then on, we were inseparable. I admired his strong bond with his family at first, but it didn't take long for me to realize they were more than just close. They were controlling. They inserted themselves into every aspect of Jame's life, and unfortunately, that meant mine too. Plans were constantly canceled because someone in his family needed something, and James treated their requests like royal decrees. Despite these red flags, I convinced myself that once we were married, things would change. I was so wrong. The wedding that wasn't mine, our wedding was grand, extravagant, and completely dictated by Jame's family. They controlled the guest list, the decorations, even the food. His mother had opinions about everything, from my dress choice to the seating arrangements. At some point, I felt like an outsider at my own wedding. My parents, despite being contributors to the wedding expenses, were sidelined. Every time I raised a concern, James would say, "They just want the best for us." But deep down, I knew it wasn't about us, it was about them. But my real wake-up call came right after the wedding. I was excited about our honeymoon, a dream vacation in Bali, something we had planned for months. It wasn't my first choice. I had wanted Europe, but James insisted we go somewhere his family had been and recommended. I compromised, thinking it would still be a romantic escape. The morning after the wedding, James sat me down with an awkward smile. "My family decided to turn our honeymoon into a family trip," he announced casually. I stared at him, stunned, and then he dropped the real bombshell. "They don't think you should come. As the newest family member, it's your duty to stay behind and take care of the house." I blinked. Surely he was joking. But no, he smiled, completely oblivious to how cruel and ridiculous he sounded. He even reassured me that this was a great way to show my commitment to his family. Something inside me snapped. If I allowed this, I would be setting the precedent for a lifetime of being sidelined, disregarded, and treated like a servant. But instead of reacting with anger, I took a deep breath, smiled sweetly, and said, "I understand." James looked relieved and hurried to pack for his new honeymoon with his family. I, on the other hand, quietly booked a last-minute flight to Maui, where my parents owned a vacation home. Before leaving, I left James a note. "Since you'll be enjoying Bali with your family, I decided to take care of my own responsibilities as well. See you when you're back." Then, without looking back, I grabbed my bags and left. A solo honeymoon arriving in Hawaii felt like stepping into a different world, one where I was free. I spent the next 2 weeks indulging in everything I had envisioned for my honeymoon: spa days, surfing lessons, fine dining. I strolled along the beach at sunset, feeling the waves wash away my stress. And most importantly, I reflected on my marriage. I had bent over backward trying to fit into Jame's world, ignoring all the warning signs. But now I knew my worth. When I finally turned my phone back on, I was bombarded with messages and missed calls, hundreds of them. James' voicemails grew more frustrated by the minute. His family's texts ranged from confusion to outright hostility. His mother accused me of disrespecting family traditions, while his sister called me a disappointment. They even had the audacity to insult my own family, calling us ill-mannered and selfish. But what really solidified my decision? The moment they started harassing my parents. The final straw, James' mother and sister showed up at my parents' house, demanding to know where I was. They made such a scene that the neighbors got involved. My poor mother, who had been so proud of my wedding, was devastated. My father was livid. That was the final straw. When James called again, this time with a desperate plea for me to apologize to his family so they could forgive me, I nearly dropped my phone in disbelief. "They'll forgive me?" I laughed. "James, you should be begging for my forgiveness." That's when I knew I was done. I told James I wouldn't be coming home. I deserved better than a marriage where I was nothing more than a servant to his overbearing family. My parents welcomed me back with open arms, and my friend has been my rock through all of this. I've already contacted a lawyer to start the annulment process. James still doesn't get it. He thinks him being unreasonable, throwing away our marriage over a small misunderstanding. But I know the truth. This wasn't just about the honeymoon. It was about the rest of my life. And I refuse to spend it being treated like an afterthought. The aftermath: it's been a month since I left, and James is still in denial. He has tried everything, apologizing, making excuses, even having his family send gifts to my parents in an attempt to smooth things over. His mother, of course, still refuses to see me as anything more than a disobedient wife who embarrassed her son. But I don't care anymore. My lawyer assured me that since the marriage is so recent, an annulment is completely doable. And moving on. In fact, I've started seeing a therapist to work through the deep-seated need I had to please everyone at the expense of my happiness. Looking back, I don't regret anything. Would I have liked a happy marriage? Of course, but not at the cost of my dignity. So, was I wrong for choosing my own happiness instead of staying home to do chores while my husband went on a family honeymoon? I don't think so. And for the first time in a long time, I don't need anyone else's approval to know that. I told James that he needed to resolve this feud more than I did because I didn't owe him or his family anything. If he chose to side with them, he would lose me the second he did. Before he could respond, I hung up. My hands trembled with a mix of anger and adrenaline. I couldn't listen to his pathetic excuses anymore. Every time he tried to explain things, it only reinforced how little he understood, or maybe how little he cared, about my perspective. How could he expect me to stay in a situation where my feelings and needs were constantly dismissed? Since that call, I've been taking time to reflect on my next steps. The more I think about our relationship, the more I see how one-sided it has been. I've always been the one to compromise, bending over backward to make things work. But I'm done. Done sacrificing my happiness for people who clearly don't respect me. It won't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm taking control of my life. The aftermath that night, as I lay in bed at my friend's apartment, my mind wouldn't shut off. The weight of the years I had spent in this relationship pressed down on me. I had given so much of myself, so much patience, understanding, and love, only to be met with indifference. It wasn't just about James. It was his family too. Their passive-aggressive comments, their constant intrusions, the way they expected me to fit into their mold without question. And James had let it happen. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I spent the day reading through messages and comments from Reddit where I had shared bits of my story. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Strangers, people who had never met me, were telling me I deserved better. And for the first time, I believed them. I called my parents and told them everything. They were shocked. They had always suspected James' family was controlling, but they didn't realize how deep it ran. My mother, who had always tried to remain neutral, finally let her emotions show. "You need to come home," she said. "You need to be with people who love you." Update 2. An unexpected ally, I decided to move in with my parents for now. There were 2 reasons for this. First, I had stayed at my friend's place long enough, and even though she insisted I could stay as long as I needed, I didn't want to overstay my welcome. Second, I didn't want my parents to be alone if James' family decided to harass them again. Hopefully, there wouldn't be a next time, but by now, I had learned that predicting their behavior was impossible. Moving back home felt oddly comforting, like reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost in the chaos. My parents were relieved to have me back, and I could see how much they had been worrying about me. Being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being without ulterior motives was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Then, something unexpected happened. A stranger reached out through a mutual friend. That stranger was Pam, James' ex-girlfriend. At first, I was confused. Why would she want to talk to me? But when she explained that she had heard about everything and wanted to offer support, I was curious. We exchanged a few messages and eventually decided to meet for coffee. Pam's story talking to Pam was like looking into a mirror. Her story was eerily similar to mine. When she first started dating James, she thought he was a devoted family man, just like I had. She admired his close relationship with his family, but over time, she began to notice the cracks. Whenever they made plans, a family member would somehow end up tagging along. They had no privacy. She told me about a particularly strange incident where they had planned a weekend getaway, something she had been excited about for weeks. But suddenly, James' mom claimed she wasn't feeling well. Worried, they took her to the doctor, only to find out there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. It was as if she had faked the whole thing just to keep them from spending time alone together. That was when Pam realized this wasn't a normal, close-knit family. It was a deeply controlling and manipulative one. She also mentioned how, whenever she attended family dinners, they expected her to clean the table and wash the dishes afterward. In most families, a guest is treated as a guest. But in James' family, Pam was expected to earn her place. What struck me the most was how James never stepped in. He never defended her. He acted as if this treatment was normal. Pam tried to talk to James about it, hoping he'd understand and set boundaries. But he dismissed her feelings, accusing her of not trying hard enough, of not understanding how important family was to him. She fought to make it work for a while, but eventually, she realized nothing would change. James was too enmeshed in his family's toxic dynamics to ever prioritize his partner. Listening to Pam, I felt validated. Everything she described echoed my own experiences. James had a pattern, pulling women into his life, then suffocating them under the weight of his family's expectations. The more Pam talked, the more I knew my situation would never improve. After our conversation, I felt a mix of relief, anger, sadness, but most importantly, clarity. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being unreasonable. This was a pattern, and James wasn't going to change. Update 3. The final confrontation. As I mentioned in my last update, I decided to divorce James. The decision wasn't easy, but it was the best thing for me. I've already signed the divorce papers, but am still waiting to hear back from James. In the meantime, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life, pouring my energy into my career and my mental well-being. The other night, I went to my friend's birthday party, the same friend who took me in when everything first fell apart. I was hesitant at first, worried about what people might say. The thought of facing judgment, knowing I had married and was divorcing in such a short span, was terrifying. But I refused to hide. I wasn't going to let fear control my life. For a while, everything was fine. People were kind, more understanding than I expected. I started to relax. And then, James stormed into the venue. My stomach dropped. How did he even know I was here? He locked eyes with me and made a beeline in my direction, his face twisted with anger. He immediately launched into a tirade, demanding to know how I could do this to him. I calmly asked what he meant. Was I not allowed to attend a friend's birthday party now? But my composure only fueled his rage. He started making a scene, lecturing me about how I was destroying our sacred bond. I almost laughed at the absurdity. What was sacred about a marriage where my husband let his family walk all over me? I tried to walk away, but James followed, his voice growing louder. Just when things were about to spiral further, a guy at the party stepped in, firmly telling James to back off. And that's when James lost it. He screamed that I was cheating, accusing me of filing for divorce because I was having an affair. Then, completely unhinged, he lunged at the guy. People rushed to separate them, dragging James out of the venue as he yelled that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The next day, I called James' mother. I was done playing nice. I told her in no uncertain terms, if James or anyone in their family harassed me again, I would file a restraining order. She seethed, but I didn't back down. This chapter of my life is ending, and am finally ready to move forward on my own terms.